$500 million at stake. Question was, from the executive standpoint, is how good is our case? It's just hard, right? Because you've had a team, on a massive project. They may have spent the last 3 or 4 years of their life working on this. An attorney comes in, we're involved for 3 days, and someone wants our opinion as, well, how good is our case?
A construction attorney with 30 years of experience gets sent a contract from a client's client. He starts reading a red line and something is off. The changes are arguing against the person who wrote them. Turns out they used ChatGPT to do the red line, and it looked completely legit. Professional language, proper legal wording, but it was fighting against their own position. That's one of the stories you're going to hear today from Michael Vardaro, a construction attorney based in New York who spent 3 decades in this space. We're talking about how AI is actually being used in construction law right now. From tools that found multiple hidden change orders in a single drawing set to the fact that the American Arbitration Association just launched an AI arbitrator to hear cases. This one might just make you think twice about how you're using these tools and maybe how you're not using them.
Okay, good afternoon, Michael. Okay, so we're going to have a good discussion today on how artificial intelligence, that word that keeps coming up and you may have heard a few times by now, is affecting law and as law relates to the construction industry. So we see how these tools are disrupting law in many other industries, but something that we don't hear a lot of on, and why we have you here today, is how it's impacting construction specifically. So, Michael, I'm glad that you are here with us. Could you start us off? Tell us a little bit about you, your company, and then we'll dive into some questions about what I just said.
Great, Owen. It's great to be here. Appreciate the invite. Looking forward to our discussion. I am Michael Vardaro, a construction attorney based in New York City. Have been a construction attorney for about 30 years now and work with a whole host of various folks in the industry. Our firm is a firm that is entirely focused on construction law. That is pretty much all we do. So I think hopefully we are connected, and hopefully we can provide you and your guests some insight on AI and what it means to both construction and construction law.
Very cool. Um, okay, could you tell us then what are some use cases you're seeing right now with AI and as it relates to law and as it relates to construction?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you take construction law separately from just law itself, one of the big things that construction lawyers need to deal with is, number one, the volume of data, right? So construction projects, there are incredible amounts of emails, RFIs, daily reports, drawing files, all kinds of things. And what we need to do is we need to then take that huge volume of data and analyze it. And as lawyers, we need to know the law. We need to know how to, in a case of a dispute, properly litigate that case and be the voice of our client. But in the world of construction, you really can't do that unless you understand the technical complexities of construction. So you kind of have to marry both legal prowess with a pretty good understanding of the technical complexities. So I think when you have that basis, you realize that one of the things that we've seen in our industry is really the use of AI is focused on dealing with all of that data. So, for years we've struggled with how do you look at all of these documents? Um, I first got into the industry and there were a lot of paper files. That's all there were. Um, but a lot of the other discussions were handled with a phone call or at a meeting. And then we got into the age of emails. And now we've gone beyond that and we've got text messages, we've got chats. We just have a crazy amount of data. And while there's been an explosion in the amount of data, there there have been some tools that we've used to review, right? Electronic review. Instead of physically flipping pages, we're able to flip it on a screen. But I think we're finally seeing with AI an ability to cut down some of the time that gets spent, looking and trying to find things in the documents.
So you mentioned, yeah, the ability to be able to sift through heaps and heaps of data. I've been maybe exaggerating slightly here, but flick of a flick of a switch, you're able to get quick context. Maybe it's a little bit slower than that, but you get the point, right? It's now gone down from hours and hours and hours of your time to perhaps minutes to be able to decipher what's going on within a case that you might be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think like any lawyer would say, oh, and I don't know if it's down to minutes, but here's what I would say, right? It's a huge effort. And so what AI can do is provide, I'll call it the first pass. So maybe locating, a lot of times we're looking for something specific. Maybe we're meeting with a witness. He was the project manager and he remembers something that happened, but can't find anything to support that. Well, you can go through lots and lots of documents. Now we've got an AI tool that it's not just a Boolean search, right? Because we did have Boolean searches for a while, which allowed us to find exact matches of words. The problem is the way a lawyer is thinking about something may be different than the project manager was thinking about it, or even one project manager to another might be using different terminology. So sometimes you wouldn't find that. With AI, you're able to more easily find it. Now, it's not perfect, but it certainly helps you hone in on maybe some of those important things. So we're able to get to the right spot quicker. And then it's a matter of the lawyers really jumping into it, understanding what the documents say, and kind of taking the rest of the process that we would typically employ.
Okay. So talking of like deciphering data, is there like maybe another layer to that in terms of like you mentioned maybe this was off camera, but you said that you were primarily in litigation. I don't know if you said primarily, but that's a large chunk of what you do, and therefore, is it just is are the AI tools just for litigation in that you delivered a case and you have all this paperwork to go through, and then as you just mentioned, now it gets you to where you need to be slightly quicker, or are there other use cases perhaps where I'm thinking might be preventative mechanisms whereby to prevent disputes and these cases happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a whole host of tools out there. Certainly, there's some things that can be used, tools that can be used in terms of hopefully preventing disputes, right? Which is kind of a broad brushed way to say it because in reality, as long as you increase your effectiveness of communicating with the project participants, right, you're in theory reducing the risk of any potential disputes happening. Um, but I think there's maybe some different buckets there. One bucket is before you even get to the project, just in terms of negotiating a contract. Um, it depends on the size of the project, obviously, but for significant size projects, those contracts can be super complex. There are various participants in the construction process. So there's the need to really coordinate the scopes of various entities, and then kind of looking at legal terms and certain organizations. Let's take a contractor, for instance. One contractor may have an appetite for a particular project, um, even with certain risks, whereas another contractor may say, well, given those risks, we're really not interested. So, it depends on the organization. There's a lot of variables. And so those contracts often take a decent amount of time to negotiate. One of the benefits, obviously, with AI is to really kind of focus in on that. And so, for organizations that have some of those products and make use of them correctly, it certainly can be a time saver, number one. And number two, it can help identify risk profiles on a project.
Yeah, very nice.
Major construction projects are complex, and delivery leaders know that things rarely go to plan. The problem is that most teams don't see what's slipping or why until it's too late. The best construction leaders know that in order to deliver on schedule, everyone needs to be planning together, committing to targets, and tracking performance every day. By bringing look-aheads, weekly work plans, visual staging diagrams, and daily activity briefings into one multiplayer platform, AFEX gives the world's leading projects a single place to plan and coordinate their work. Join the largest contractors across Europe, the UK, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. Learn more at aphex.co. That's aphex.co. In construction, precision matters. Every budget line, every schedule, every document. But too often, project data is scattered across tools and departments, creating risky silos. That's where ArcDesk comes in. ArcDesk is the all-in-one construction management platform designed to connect your entire project operation, from opportunity through to tender, all the way to handover. With real-time dashboards, cost control, scheduling, procurement, and document management in one place, ArcDesk gives you complete visibility and control. Trusted by contractors, subcontractors, and asset owners worldwide, ArcDesk has powered landmark projects from shopping centers to Europe's tallest buildings. If you're ready to reduce risk, protect your margins, and deliver projects with confidence, discover ArcDesk today. Visit arcdesk.com, that's ARCH desk.com, and see how leading firms are building smarter with ArcDesk.
So contract reviews, that needs to be like a quote unquote physical documents that bind two parties together into a contract to deliver a project. Within that, you also had things like technical documentation, and you touched upon the point earlier. To be in construction law, you need to have the technical understanding of construction sites. So, are you seeing much use from the drawing review perspective? I think you also touched upon like coordination of scope. So we've certainly seen lots of tools where they're like checking errors between documents. So there's plenty of cases where like you've probably been involved in plenty of them where the drawing says one thing, the scope says another thing, person on site said something else, and it's all a little bit uncoordinated.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that there are some really interesting platforms that are now being used. I know we had one um, case that we're aware of where there was a platform called Firmus
Mm,
AI, FIRMUS.
yep.
And what happened was that that's kind of on the pre-construction side. So it basically allowed the contractor on a very, very sophisticated project to input the set of drawings and specifications. And then it kind of went through its analysis, whatever it does. And out came, I think it was 17 potential change orders.
Mm,
Um, what was interesting about those change orders and the product that it gave to the contractor was that they were well defined in that they specifically referenced pieces of the contract documents that were supposedly in conflict or where something wasn't specified correctly, it wasn't per code, those kinds of things. So I think what's super helpful, right, for all parties involved, and we can touch upon later, like how does that help the process overall? But certainly when you have a tool like that, we all know, or anyone in the construction industry knows, how time consuming it is if you have a set of drawings that say 1,000 sheets to go through it, right? And on a particular drawing, you're then referenced to various details that are on a whole bunch of other sheets. And to kind of go through all of that and coordinate and to figure out where something is in conflict or something's not jiving. I would say that because we're all humans, right? That effort is so large sometimes that you don't quite get to the end. You never really get it done. And it's not a knock on project managers because it's also the design team that doesn't quite get all that correct. So I think that's where AI can come into play because it can do so many of those processes that it's able to take all of that. And I think what's most effective is that not only does it provide you with what it thinks is the issue, but it gives you the citation. So it tells you exactly where in that drawing set there's an issue, or here are the three details that are in conflict. And so now you can, as the project manager or whoever's bidding on the project, et cetera, they can now go look at those citations, right? So basically that platform is bringing you to the issue, and now you can use the human insight to say, okay, yeah, right, there is an issue here, or maybe it's not, right? But I think it just cuts down a tremendous amount of time. And quite frankly, in that example, it might actually get us to a place where we typically wouldn't get before. We wouldn't get there until the litigation ensued.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm just taking a note. Very cool. Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking about where to take this next, but I think that what might be interesting to hear about is um do these tools as they come, as they are, they obviously give people like a good starting point, or they give them perhaps like a good foundation in order that maybe they don't necessarily need to engage a legal team. They might be a smaller company, for example, who don't, whereas like legal is not, or one is maybe not affordable, or it's not as much of a priority as like a big company who even have their own in-house legal teams and etc. So, th- does the AI world and the tools that are coming out, does it give like maybe the people who don't typically use legal services a better foundation, and are they more protected when it comes to construction? And does it give them like something that they might not have had before? And I suppose like what the root to the question is like, are th- are what these tools giving people that are they legally accepted? If that makes sense. So like, if someone comes to you and it's like, oh, I've used all of this, is your reaction like, uh, you obviously still need to do your due diligence and whatnot, but is it like, is it looked upon or frowned upon or accepted by the courts or the people that like that? I think it's the AAA we mentioned before. Like, how are they viewing it? Sorry, that was such a
I would
waffly
say,
question, but I was got to
yeah,
my
no,
point
I
eventually.
yeah, I certainly understand where you're going with it, right? Because I think the benefit of the advanced tool, right, of AI and whatever platform you're you're considering, it is hopefully helping the company get to a place where they can better perform their task, whatever that might be. And so if they're achieving that goal, then certainly they're doing a good thing legally, right? Because you're avoiding a potential claim or et cetera. Um, on the flip side, let's say if we take kind of the example we were talking about before, where there's some package that's helping you negotiate a contract, can that be helpful? Yes, it certainly can. I think what we've seen in the industry is that you can't replace the professional, whether that's a project manager, whether that's a construction executive, or whether that's an attorney. And the reason is that I'll give you an example. So a couple of weeks ago, we received a contract that was sent to our client by their client. And when I started reviewing the contract, I was super confused because they had started off with a typical AIA form contract, which is fairly common in the United States for vertical construction. And they made some changes that seemed to be made from the perspective of my own client. So it was opposite of what they would want to make
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in that document. fast forwarding to the end of the discussion, what we found out was that the individual had used ChatGPT to provide the red line.
Uh-huh.
And so while the red line looked really good and it had wording that you would typically see and you would think it came from a lawyer, the problem in this instance was that it was going against their own position. So, I think that's where it gets a little complicated.
Mhm.
There are certainly folks that are negotiating contracts in the construction industry that know contracts very well, just as good as any lawyer, right? And so they can certainly use those tools, but they're using them the same way that an attorney would be using them, which is that it's a tool. It doesn't replace your judgment, and I think that's the other important point for construction projects. We're not building an iPhone, right? An iPhone is done in a factory. Every little detail of how that's getting done has been, scripted, and it's perfect.
Mhm.
And if it's not, it gets rejected and we build another one. Construction projects, every single one is different. And it's not just different in terms of what's getting built, but also the risks, right? Time is always important. Cost is always important. I mean, you've got certain variables that always come into play, but how important each one is can certainly be very different. And so you've got to use judgment, in figuring out in a contract, well, is this provision something that's a deal breaker or not? And, at least at this point, that's not where AI is yet.
Yeah, that's a really great point you make. 'Cause I think a lot of people, me included, guilty as charged, have used like for simple contracts, just put it into Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT, and like these are very very basic. They wouldn't be done for anything, like maybe just a friendly agreement or whatever. Um, but like, I feel like I'm asking the wrong person here because I kind of know what your answer would be, but. Does it make sense to ever like rely on a tool like a ChatGPT or Gemini to give you like a contractual agreement, or is a strong advice no?
Well, you use the word rely, and I would say no. But let me change your question a little bit.
Go for it.
Is it worthwhile to use it as a tool? I think it is, right? I mean, let's be realistic. The great thing that it will do is that it'll raise some issues. So you may read what it says and you say, none of that is useful. But if it gives you just one thing that's useful to think about
Mm,
in the 20 seconds that it took to do it, I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you look at that, right? And certainly us lawyers, right? Like having experience doing contracts, we know going into it what's going to be important. And sometimes, obviously we use some different
yeah,
tools than just the typical Gemini or Chat GPT, but those tools can raise some issues that we should be thinking about, and again, it's using the judgment. Is this something that we should think about and consider, or maybe it's not, right? But to have considered it and to say, I don't need to worry about it, it's much better to do it that way than to have never considered it at all.
yeah, 100%. I really like that. Yeah, a tool in the toolbox is a good analogy to use here. Um,
Absolutely.
do you find people that are like my guess is you roll your eyes more nowadays than you did before because people are pseudo legal experts when they come to you and then engage you and maybe challenge you a little bit more on like what you are suggesting to them. Do you find that's the case, or are you able to handle that quite effectively in terms of you are the expert and listen to me?
I would say there's a mixed bag there, Owen, right? I mean, certainly there's some times where people think that they've got the answer. I think what is helpful though is that we certainly have clients that use it, and we know they they do because we get into a discussion and we know they're asking questions that we know they wouldn't be asking,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because we've known these folks for 20 years. However, what I will say is that again, it's kind of this idea of issue spotting and saying, you know, hey guys, I kind of threw this into Chat GPT and it raised this issue that I was thinking about. Can we talk about it? yeah, you know what? That's a good issue. Let's talk about it. Regardless, I won't comment on whether they got the right answer. It's not about the answer, right? It's about thinking about these issues. Much like a construction project, right? You've got you've got a little bit of an obstacle. You didn't get a piece of equipment delivered, and that's going to affect construction and the schedule. So now you've got to start restacking the trades, and how is that going to work? So, okay, maybe I say, I asked the AI platform, here's our schedule, right? This piece of equipment's not being delivered on time. What should I do? It may not give the answer as to what you should do, but a lot of times for a scheduler, it might make them think about something. So maybe it's not giving you the right answer, but maybe your ultimate answer is affected by the input that you got.
Mm, mm. Fair enough. Do you find that the tools that are within construction technology industry area themselves, like Firmus, the one you mentioned, there's plenty of others now, and more crop up day by day of drawing reviews and scope gap reviews and this kind of stuff. Are these tools targeted? I know that obviously the key target customer of these tools are construction companies, but are there use cases, and do they ever approach companies like you as a potential customer of theirs? Because I don't know, say for example, you do come into a case whereby your client hasn't used one of these tools, and then you decide, actually, do you know what? Like, if I just used one of these tools myself, I could probably get to an answer much quicker. Is that the case?
I think that there are some instances where a construction attorney may do a little bit of that. I think it's really more of kind of things up front in a case, so kind of an initial analysis and get a little bit of a gut check, if you will. I think for the most part, those tools will be used by our experts. So, one of the things in construction litigation, no matter where you are, you really rely heavily on experts to provide some opinions, right? That's the way we get certain evidence admissible before the court for consideration. And so, it's those experts that would use those tools. So, in essence, it's an extension of the attorneys.
Mm, okay, very cool. And one thing, and then I'm going to ask you about how you've used some of the like processing of data in a second. But one thing we get come across in construction industry a lot is this notion, and this is probably like you hear in the mainstream news as well, actually, of how professionals like yourself, lawyers, consultants within the industry, who their charging models typically by the hour. AI obviously now reduces the time it takes to get to an answer a lot quicker, as we sort of touched upon in this industry. How is that affecting your business model and like charging structure as a company?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly affects it, right? I mean, however, I don't think it has the effect that some people think it will. So let me explain my
I mean,
thoughts at
people
least
love
on.
the bold headlines, right? So,
Yeah, right. It's an eye-catching headline. Everyone wants to reduce lawyer fees. I get it, right? I'm on the other side. Um, but if you really think about, and we can actually use a really good example in the industry, right? Which is for a lot of design professionals years ago when CAD first came out, computer assisted drafting, right? I mean, it was a big thing. And the thought was that all of those design firms that used to have just, an office filled with drafting tables and people would be drafting and lettering and all of that stuff. All of that was gone like that. If you look at the statistics, right, the employment in those industries didn't fall off a cliff. It never did. Why? Because it didn't replace the professionals. CAD replaced some of the monotonous tasks that those professionals would do. I mean, I think, I know you're in London, I'm in New York City. If we look at the skylines in those two cities alone, um, radically changed by the implementation of some of these tools. Why? Because those professionals have now had the opportunity to focus their efforts not on lettering or redrafting a common detail. Now that's all done in a split second. Now they can focus on engineering a skyscraper, right? That is something that we never engineered before. So I think for lawyers, it's that same kind of thing. Yes, it certainly will replace some of the tasks that we do day in and day out. It already has. Um, However, I don't think it's going to replace the professionals. And I think what it's going to allow us to do is to do a better job in representing our clients across the board.
And I suppose in some ways it allows you to trim out the crap and maybe put you in the right, so you're able to put more resource into the areas that deserve more resource, not resource like resource trying to find where those areas might be that you need to spend the more time in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that makes a great lawyer is that you can't do everything you want to do to prepare for a case.
Mm.
That's just a given, right? Because you don't have an unlimited budget and you don't have unlimited time. What makes a great attorney great is that they're able to figure out what's really important and do those things and prioritize. So I think this kind of goes to that
Mm.
piece, which is that we're going to be able to focus on certain things and do a much better job at doing those things because we have these tools. And the time we're spending, if you took the same 10 hours of effort, we're now able to create a much better work product because we're able to use that time much more effectively on things that are more strategic.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to steal a term I heard yesterday from um, Kevin Peterson, who's a CTO of Bedrock Robotics, who came on Bricks and Bytes and spoke to us. And he said LLMs are book smart. They're not. They're not. They're not the like the unhidden knowledge. And an example you gave, the knowing what to focus on, is the skill of the arbitrator. They're not good and or at this stage capable of that hidden kind of knowledge. So, I think what you're describing there is that's how we sum it up.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely agree.
okay, cool.
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
Okay, yeah, Michael, do you have a case study perhaps on like how you as a firm have used and we'll go back to the example which you mentioned very early on here about sifting. I'm gonna butcher you what you said, but I actually have the notes. Processing large volumes of data. Could you give us an example of maybe how you've used that in a case in your firm?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that there's lots of different ways it comes about, but I think a good example of the power that the AI tool brings to construction litigation is something that happens often. We did have a project, large project, $500,000 at stake in terms of claims. And so, as I had mentioned before, obviously, just a tremendous amount of data and information. One of the problems with construction litigation is that there's so much data. The parties are usually so far apart in the beginning from their own perspective, right? And the perspective is based on the executives being told by their teams, right, that the other guy or other gal is responsible. So that's how you start. And I think what's the most effective thing to get to resolution is to quickly get to an understanding factually of what really happened. And it sounds like a very easy premise, but it isn't in a construction case oftentimes because of the immense amount of data. The fact that maybe various folks from the project have left, they're no longer there. right? Everyone's got a different recollection. So in this one particular situation, um, we had a whole bunch of data. And the question was, from the executive standpoint, is how good is our case, right? That's what people want to know. And it's really hard for an attorney, right? That's where we get bashed for giving the attorney answer, which is it always starts with it depends, right? Um, it's just hard, right? Because you've had a team, on a massive project. They may have spent the last 3 or 4 years of their life working on this. An attorney comes in, we're involved for 3 days, and someone wants our opinion as well. How good is our case? So, how do you get there quickly? One of the things that AI can do, obviously, is to really process data and do it very fast. And in a lot of cases, which super important to understand is the chronology of what happened. So in this particular case, it was really effective at taking all of the documents and putting together a chronology. Again, every entry on that timeline was referenced. So we knew exactly where the information was coming from, and having some folks double check it. Yeah, there were a couple of mistakes or things that weren't quite right. But for the most part, we got to that point super fast, much faster than we could ever do without AI. And the benefit of that is then for an organization to be able to get a better read from its own attorney as to the strengths and weaknesses of its own case. And that allows for a quicker path to resolution. I mean, obviously, that's not always the case. Some cases will go and get tried, but obviously that's kind of one instance, one example of something that could happen. That's just pure documents. Um, you know, so
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. That's good to hear. I mean, we've had a few examples about change 17 change orders, and also you sifting through the data yourselves in separate cases. Is there something? So, when we spoke about previously, again, I'll let you explain, but just so you know what I'm trying to ask here is about the new AAA arbitration model. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And I think that the prompt here is that they now allowing AI to hear cases and provide interim decisions.
okay, yeah. So there's an AI arbitrator solution that the American Arbitration Association has put out there. It was active as of, I think it was November 3rd, 2025. So it's relatively new. So the American Arbitration Association, I'd say, is probably the leading arbitration association when it comes to construction claims in the US. And the idea behind the AI arbitrator is to take smaller cases. So it's cases where there are only two parties involved and cases where it's a document only submission. So that really excludes a lot of arbitrations in the construction industry because typically there's multiple parties and there's live witnesses and testimony and argument. However, I think that this was interesting to me, and in disclosure, I am one of the arbitrators on the American Arbitration Association's construction panel. So I just want that to be known. But I think that this was kind of a groundbreaking advancement for a couple of reasons. First, the AAA is 100 years old, and so you think about what it's done over all these years, and to make such kind of a radical change and to adopt this, I think was great. I think it's also an organization that has a lot of respect, especially in the construction industry. And so the way that they set this up is actually really interesting and very unique. And I think it's worthwhile just explaining, which is that it's not an AI agent that is making a decision. what we're doing is we're employing a process to get the parties to a decision in a much quicker fashion than they would otherwise get there. So there's a couple of really important steps in the process. So the parties would both independently submit their claim to the AI arbitrator. So, in essence, it would be the claim, it would be the evidence, it would be their arguments. All of that would go to this agent that would then take them and basically give back to the parties a summary of what it thinks it received. What's really interesting is that the parties now at that point have an opportunity to say, wait a second, AI arbitrator, what you said isn't correct, or maybe it is correct, but you also need to understand this point. So there's an opportunity to give feedback to the AI arbitrator at that point. And I think one of the important points here is, right, like parties always want to know that they are being heard. And I think this step is a very important one. So that goes back to the AI arbitrator. And then the AI arbitrator, a different agent, basically then takes the information. So it's now got the facts as alleged by each of the parties, what their arguments are. And now, based on learning from, I think it's over 1,500 American Arbitration Association decisions and prior cases, it comes up with a draft award.
Mm.
That draft award is then given to a human arbitrator. That human arbitrator looks at the submissions, looks at the summary from the AI agent, and then looks at that decision and determines, is it fine the way it is, or do I need to change it? And that arbitrator then does what it believes is appropriate and then issues the decision. So in reality, there's a human issuing the decision, which is important for various reasons, but getting to that point, right, has been greatly expedited.
Mm. Yeah. I'm trying to think that whether this could be another step in the process of like settling disputes. I think over here in like certainly UK contract law, the what the courts or like professional bodies over here recommend is like you follow a process of negotiation, mediation, adjudication, arbitration, and litigation. Like you kind of like at the levels of escalation, certainly in the UK, maybe in the US as well. But I wonder if like AI is able to add like another kind of what do you like a step within that hierarchy of escalation, which maybe does help prevent. I don't know if that's good for you as a law company, as a law firm, but helps prevent these stuff going to the courts.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In fact, that's one of the ways that I think maybe a next step, right? So this solution is really a two-party document only submission. Now, what's interesting is, so in theory, that really doesn't apply to large projects. But I would proffer that on a large project, there's typically some sort of mechanism that addresses disputes that occur during the course of the project, right? So for example, you're building an airport, they're late on getting equipment. It's going to have schedule impacts. As we know, like the dollars on those projects, huge. So what are we going to do? How do we get past this? We need a decision as to who's going to fund the overage. And no one wants to fund it. The owner doesn't have the money. The contractors and the designers say it's not us. So there's often this mechanism in the contracts that allows for an interim decision to be made, which in essence keeps the project moving, which mitigates damages for everyone,
Mm.
right? And then we can come back later and figure out who's really responsible. in my mind, right, this is a solution that might be very good for that type of mechanism, which is that, okay, everyone makes a submission, we get a decision, which is basically a temporary decision. How is that going to be funded? We move forward. And then, typically on a provision like that, at the end of the project, there's a reservation of rights so that those parties, if they think that that decision was wrong, they can still litigate it and argue about who's responsible for those costs. But again, what it does is it keeps the project moving and minimizes damages and delays. And so in that sort of scenario, I think it would certainly be be helpful. I think the AAA also believes that at some point, right, this is kind of we're rolling this out and this is how it's going to be used. And at some point, we're going to go beyond this and use it in a more expansive way.
Mm, yeah, very cool. Um, okay, where are we? We have like maybe another 15 minutes or so. I want to ask you a very general question here, but take AI out of the picture for a moment. I know that a lot of this discussion has been centered around that as is a hot topic, but as a law firm and an attorney, can you just tell us what's general good practice within the construction industries for some of the companies that you work for? And then I will follow up and ask you now how has AI changed that advice? Has it changed that advice that you give to people typically?
I mean, that's a super broad
It
question. I
is.
would say, like, keeping it giving you an overall answer that applies to everyone. I think that if you look at construction disputes, right, and what we're really talking about is how do we avoid them? Um, it all comes down usually to communication. There are certainly those cases where there's a clear error by somebody. But I would say that in this day and age, that isn't as prevalent. What is more prevalent is there's a lack of communication on some level. And it's really interesting, right? Because that's always been the case in construction. But with all of the tools we have nowadays, you would think that communication would get better. And in certain ways, it has. But in certain ways, sometimes the divide is even greater because of all of the information, and people take that information to mean different things. And so, one of the things that I think we always advise is to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And you don't do that by sending a CYA email. You do that by sending an email and having a discussion and making sure, right, that your client or your colleague on a project really understands what's happening.
Mm, mm. Um, Fine. And I recently heard that um, um, in the example of meeting minutes, say, and you can educate me perhaps on whether like what the stance is from a legal perspective on meeting minutes, whether they're official or not. But with the advent of AI note takers, which now appear in everyone's meetings, obviously everything is recorded and transcribed, and there's action points, and you can find out everything about everything of what was discussed. But then there is this question of like, okay, are these which is then an official minute, which can then later be used perhaps in a claim or in an official report on the project. Do, do you get what I'm asking? Is there like
Yeah,
is this having some kind of play in the field?
absolutely. It goes to the heart of communication, right? So let's take, say there's some project participants, they're on a Zoom call, they're using some AI note taking agent. So at the end of that call, they have these meeting minutes. What's really interesting is that it is not a transcription of what was said. In other words, it's not a word for word recording of it. It is what the AI agent believes is important, which is not always accurate, number one. as everyone in the construction industry knows, the devil's in the details. And if you don't have certain details, it becomes something that is or can be very misleading. The other thing is that it may not grasp certain concepts. And so there may be an entry on in those meeting minutes that's just incorrect, or maybe not incorrect, but not accurate, right? And what happens with meeting minutes in the construction industry, right? They get circulated. There's that language that says, if you have any comments, let us know in 7 days. Otherwise, everyone assumes that these are correct, right? And no one ever does anything. Um, the problem is usually those calls, even if they're recorded, those recordings are deleted after a certain amount of time. And most construction projects are pretty long, so they're gone. So all you have is that AI version of what happened. And it can become a problem. We've seen a couple of situations where it was just flat out wrong. It just didn't understand. They were talking about two different parts of the project, but it kind of combined things together.
Mm.
And so it made no sense. The problem is that's the meeting minute. And, the lawyers that want to use it are going to say, okay, but we sent it around, right? No one objected to it. So this is what everyone agreed was correct. Whereas the other side's going to say, well, wait a second. It's not what was talked about. And everyone will testify that that's not what was talked about. So all of a sudden, this tool that we thought was really going to help with communications actually made it worse. And so, I think that's one example where it's very easy nowadays to just transcribe the call,
Mm.
right? Instead of using an AI note taker, just transcribe it. Now you have the entire transcription there. It may have spelling errors or something might be a little bit off, but pretty much everything is there. So in some ways, the kind of old fashioned way of doing it, of just transcribing it, can be better in those situations. Now, the flip side of it is if you've got a transcription that's 300 pages long because it's an all-day meeting, I mean, is it valuable because you don't really have anything there? That's where AI can summarize it into 10 pages. The key, though, like
Mm.
everything we do, is that the professional has to go through it
Yeah.
and make sure it's accurate and then send it out.
I love it. So does that mean that they're like AI meeting minute notes recognized in like an arbitration case or litigation case?
Well, I mean, there's going to be battles about
Mm.
they're not recognized by themselves, right? But it's just like any other writing. It's so if I send an email, will it be recognized in court? There are ways to get that into evidence. Obviously people can weigh how important it is, and it's not to say that what's in there is the absolute truth. It's just that's what my perspective is. So it's kind of along those same lines. Obviously it also creates some other issues, especially if people don't read them, but yeah, certainly introduces another layer of complexity.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Um, okay. Is there a common silly mistake people make in construction contracts?
uh I would say everyone looks at cost, right? The financial terms. You usually know the start and end dates. And the other big item is scope. The problem, though, scope is complicated. And in some ways, right, not properly defining scope, I think, is silly because it's so important. In some ways, how can you consider it silly? Because you're almost saying it's something that's not so important, but yet it is so important. I think the scope piece is one that is so important in a contract to properly define. And, a lot of times there's a whole host of meetings and discussions that lead up to, let's say, a contractor signing an agreement, and people kind of understand what that is. They have a set of drawings and design documents that they've been given, and that's the scope to go build it, right? But like we were talking about before, with some of the AI tools, to use them to make sure that the scope is well defined. And if there's, especially if there's holes in the scope, right? That's a place where you often see some disputes because the owner's thinking the contractor's doing X, but the contractor doesn't think that they're doing X, and to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Very cool. Okay, Michael, I have one last question for you. And it's me. You'll handle it well, which is why I'm going to ask it. But I'm going to tease you a little bit. Do you have any advice for construction companies in the age of AI, when they are negotiating their fees with their legal teams? How they should now approach it? Is it different to what it was before? Are there certain questions they should be asking? That kind of thing.
I mean, from our perspective, I think lawyers should be using AI tools. Again, it's not replacing what we do, but for us to be most effective at what we do, we need to use them. And for us to be most efficient at what we do, we need to use them. So, as a client, right, obviously you want your professional to be efficient. So I think, it's understanding how that gets used. I think it's also important, right, to make sure that the folks that are working on the project really understand the complexities of it from a technical perspective, right? That marrying the legal prowess with construction knowledge, and being able to then take that and provide some sort of a plan. The big thing in the legal world now, and this goes beyond construction lawyers, is project management. I kind of find that interesting because most lawyers are now, like, there's software packages where lawyers are now using project management software to help them with the litigation.
Mm.
It's really funny because I think construction lawyers as a whole, we've benefited from dealing with all of our clients because for years we saw them use project management tools, right? Like, I've dealt with projects for 30 years with critical path methodologies, right? So, like, I get it. Like, I need to do this step before we do the next thing. So, I think we've always included that inherently in construction law, but I think that's becoming more mainstream. And I think the next step is to see, how does AI now get get kind of combined with that project management, and how does that help the industry become more efficient?
Time will tell. Okay, Michael, thank you so much. I really got into this discussion. Very fascinating to hear how I think it's a topic people are very interested in. Like at the moment, it's very hot, and especially as it relates to construction, we don't hear a lot about that. So thank you for sharing your insights and educating our audience. Um, do you, at the end of every episode, we let people plug any kind of initiative, anything that you are working on that you want to share? Are you hiring? This kind of thing. Anything you want to plug in right now? If not, we can just end.
Yeah, we're always looking for good construction folks, and I would say, uh, how about an ask? I'd love to, because I know that Bricks and Bytes has a really great viewership and a diverse community, including folks that are really at the forefront of developing the tools that people in construction can use. And hopefully that also goes to construction lawyers. And one of the things that I would love to see, because I don't think one exists, is a tool that construction lawyers can use to help us put together a case. There's all these individual tools, right? So we talked about how it is that we can go through documents in a better fashion. There are solutions like Co-Counsel and Harvey that allow us to do legal research. But to bring everything together and to prepare a case for trial, there's no solution that exists for us to kind of use as a one-stop shop. And I would love for some folks out there to come up with a solution, and I'm happy to help.
Ah, love it. I'm going to do a call to action to the community and I'll put something out. And I would say maybe your LinkedIn DMs might go a bit crazy after that, but we shall see.
It would be worth it, Owen. Trust me.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Okay, Michael, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll speak to you soon.
It's been awesome. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.